I don't want to call it a running joke, but it happens with reasonable frequency where we'll say that we got the part that we asked for, not the part that we wanted. You know, which is exactly true. You know, the drawing says do this, and our suppliers happily do that, and we get it and go, oh crap, that's not what we that's not what we meant.
And it's funny, in pilot production, that's where we're testing the manufacturing process to make sure that it's good enough to control the product. Our guys love building those because the instructions are try to screw it up. Don't do what's on the drawing, but try to do it wrong.
Right.
And if it turns out that they can do it wrong, good to know. Then that means we need to update the drawing.
Yeah, we actually just had a good example of this with a product that we're launching. This is an AC wiring thing, right? So we have to ground certain AC components within this device. And there's a ground stud, and there are like defined standards for how you stack AC wiring on a ground stud. There's typically the wire, and then there's a washer and a nut. But you consider those three things, they can be stacked on this ground stud in a few different ways. You can do washer, ring terminal nut, you can do nut washer, you can go a bunch of different ways. But there's only one way that's right. And we ran right into it. The documentation was released, it wasn't explicitly outlined, and then you look at a handful of these different things and they're done differently from one to the other. And we caught it and we fixed it, but it's that level of detail that needs to be outlined on this manufacturing documentation to make sure that we get the outputs that we want. So I took the document and I ended up going in there and very explicitly outlining, you put this thing on first, then this thing, then this thing, Yeah.
And to be clear, we're usually receiving the document from our customer and looking at it to make sure that, we think that it's clear enough, and then releasing it. And then very typically our customer will say, well, can you maintain it? As something comes up in the production cycle where you find an issue with the drawing, can you just do the ECN and update the document? And so this is the cycle that Mike is talking about, is drawing got out on the floor, it wasn't crystal clear, and I choose to believe that they were trying to do it wrong, just to point it out. But it was, and we picked it up and we went out there looking at it, and had to do a revision on the drawing. And on the same product, the line and the neutral wires were swapped. And that was a bit more subtle, but testing caught that. Right. And subtle, but still important. I mean, we test for this stuff and we look for it. We make, especially with AC wiring, because that's usually, that's plugged into the mains. You can't fool around with that.
So the first thing that we do when we get a set of documentation to build a product is it goes to our engineering department, and we'll review that documentation and try to, we do what's called a gap analysis. We try to understand the documentation that was given to us, and then the documentation that we need in order to manufacture the product the way that our customer wants. And those two things, usually there's a bit of a gap there between what they gave us and what we need in order to build it. Sometimes it's as simple as we just have to fill the gap to build the product using our processes and our controls. Sometimes the design output from the design team, which is our customer, I don't want to say that they overlook things, but they're concerned with the design of the product. They haven't fully defined a process for building it. So that's where we come in and we'll fill those gaps. You know, a customer might say, hey, take this thing and test it for functionality. And we have to say, okay, what defines functional? What do you want us to test? How do we perform those tests? And that's the gap that we need to fill. Like John said earlier, when we get a set of documentation, we ask, because we've never seen it before, you know, we're new to it. We ask a million questions, and that's what we call a gap analysis. Essentially just defining all the things that haven't been written down about how to build the product repeatably and reliably, write it down, get it controlled, and then we can go into production with it.
And we have some customers that show up with a prototype and a bunch of electronic, well, basically like SolidWorks files, but not drawings. And that's good enough to get the prototype, good enough to show that, yeah, the product works. Well, you know, now we need 50 of them. And we're also willing to take on the task of developing the drawings and identifying the, you know, what tolerances, you know, we can do a tolerance study. We usually sit down with their engineers and go over, you know, what's required, but we can put together the documentation as well. It isn't free to do that kind of work. I mean, that's true engineering work. But we can pick that up. So if someone's in a hurry, and they haven't got that documentation put together, we can, you know, lend our shoulder to the effort, and they can do some drawings, we can do some drawings, and then we review them with the customer and then get them released to get the parts going.
The only thing that I'll say is, and I think that's true of all these videos, is, you know, we spent 35-40 minutes talking about something that we could, I mean, there are entire collegiate degrees that you could do on this stuff. So it's a very high level thing. You know, I think it's important that anyone who sees these videos knows and understands that, you know, there's just a lot of detail, and we're just given a little bit of it.
And on our website, we've got an overview of the kind of documentation that you need. Usually when I send out a quote, I'll append our release to manufacturing requirements, which detail the documentation that you need and the information that needs to be on those documents. And we also have design review, or more accurately, document review checklists, so that if an engineer wants to review a document before releasing it, you know, it goes over even silly things like, did you put the part number on the document? But more importantly, is the part interfaces, where it connects to other parts in the machine. Are those the tolerances for mounting hole dimensions and things like that? Are those on that drawing? And are they accurate? Are all of them on the drawing? Are there any special notes on the drawing about surface finishes? What is the overall finish of the part? There's a million ways to finish a part, from anodizing to painting, or no finish at all. And there are customers that have no finish on their part. It's just aluminum, or God help us, steel, no finish on it. You know, that stuff, it should be finished. There should be some definition of that, because the mill finish, frankly, not controlled, it looks terrible. Customers don't get around to that, you know, level of detail, and they're in a hurry. So, you know,
Yeah,
we can work with them and get some kind of finish put on it so that it looks professional. Even if it's, you know, when part gets together, someone might say, not the look we were looking for, but at least it is a look, and now you can start tuning the design from there.